All right, so for this demo, we're going to be doing an incognito portrait of this handsome gentleman using a pencil. This is just a lead holder with a woodless graphite pencil in it, but it is just like a 6B pencil. So we're going to start off with a sort of compositional approach, just finding out what the major elements of this picture are and where they are. Those broad shoulders are part of the composition that the head rests on. So better to find the support for that important element. And then you're trying to get the slight angle that the head is on, which is a combination of the head being slightly tipped and a kind of an upward vantage point. Like not quite a worm's eye view, but we're kind of looking up that way. So once we've got kind of the head, I'm gonna start with the placement of the nose, and you'll see that in a couple other places. Generally, eyes we can think of as being halfway down the skull from the crown to the jaw, and a nose being about half the distance from the eyes to the chin. But sometimes that can vary depending on our point of view. So this slightly upward view we're taking, never mind the hat, we lose a lot of the crown of the skull, and we see a fair amount of the underside of the jaw as well as that kind of exaggerated double chin that's going on. So I've made an attempt to find the nose in that large sort of octagonal, hexagonal head shape. So instead of starting with an oval and working our way out, you'll see even in the clothing, there's a sort of a geometric faceted line, we'll call it, as in it has facets. It's more geometric than rounded, and by doing that, we can find where our curves happen faster. So now there's a little arc to help find the ears, trying to remember that we're looking slightly up on this head, so the eyes are on a little bit of a tilt. Since human eyes aren't straight on the front of your face, they kind of wrap around a little bit. A little bit more on that pronounced jawline. And once we've got a good proportion on where the eyes and nose and mouth are going to wind up, we can go ahead and find out where that hat rests. And one thing that's kind of important is to not make anything in the picture right now more important than something else. We want to think about them more as how important they are to the picture and to the accurate placement of elements. So here we are back to the nose again. Now, there's a reason that we're starting with the nose rather than, say, the eyes and work our way down, which a lot of people do, and there's inherently nothing wrong with that. Now, I'm going to pause for a second to point out that the world is separated into people who sometimes get larger as they draw and some who get smaller as they draw. I am someone who gets larger. So here we go. Let's make a smaller nose now. There's no shame in erasing. Actually, I'd even go so far to say there's shame in not erasing. So, finding the placement of the nose and a couple planes of that, not really getting detailed necessarily, but just enough to tell if our scale is right. Now, a few words on the nose. This is an anime nose. I'm writing that off camera right now, but that's all it's going to say there is anime nose. Now, the anime nose is silly, but it is based on something, and that is the anime nose is just the shadow under the very tip of the human nose. If we start with that shadow and we kind of add additional like shadow wings off to the side of it, we get the nostril lobes and the nostrils themselves, which give us enough of a framework to find accurate anatomy within our nose. So here we are diving down into the philtrum, and the bands of cartilage that twist around to form the tip of the nose, whose arrangement it is that forms the little anime nose and those extra wings out to the side. Now, while all our noses are different to a degree, they've got the same parts. Sometimes the proportion or angle may change, but the overall structure is these shapes that just widen and shorten and become more acute or more obtuse. Now, one of the reasons we've lit our portrait is because asymmetry not only makes a more interesting picture than symmetry, but it's easier to draw, and it's easier to make interesting and to make accurate. So right there, I've taken the nose and I've established what I'm going to call the smile yam. It's a band of tissue. There's muscles under it, but mostly what we get to see of people's faces is kind of fatty tissue. But the bottom of it forms this kind of the line of your smile, and the top of it is the border of the bags under your eyes. So between the eyes and the nose, there's really only one shape, and that shape takes us all the way from like the bag under your lower lid straight down to that smile line that takes you from the nose to the corner of the mouth. And if you find it right, it leaves you just enough room for a cheekbone out at the outer corner of the eye. So we're going to find one of those on the other side as well. And it's just a handy way of finding the ways that these major parts of your face connect to each other. And the reason I've opted to start with the nose is because the nose is central to that dynamic of parts, that everything leads to the nose and radiates out from the nose. All right, so we're going to go ahead and find how that eye sits in there. Since we've got a nose to kind of a bridge of the nose to center it around, and we've got the shape under the eye to tell us where that lower lid sits. And the lighting has given us enough shapes to work with that none of these facial features are just floating islands in an oval, but we've got connective shapes. We've got a puzzle to put together. And as long as one piece butts up to the very edge of another one, we can't go too far off. Admittedly, our goal here is much more about getting the species right than the person. If we get a human at the end of this, and the human is exhibiting just about the right emotion, we're in good shape. So we're just going to block in the mouth here, again, basing it on that smile yam, as we're going to call it, and the mouth. Now, a word about mouths. So the mouth itself, when closed, is just a line. We tend to think of lips as being very important for their psychological impact, but the line of the mouth itself is really, that's the opening right there. The lips, as importantly as they are really, they're the inside of the mouth. All right, so we've got some of the muscle work and fleshy work around the mouth, and now this is the inside of your mouth wrapping around the outside of your face. The lips are almost like, it's like the lining of a sleeping bag, pulled tight at the corners. Now, the top lip, in most people's cases, faces downward, at least more than the bottom lip does. Whereas the bottom lip, also the inside of your mouth wrapping around the outside of your face, faces upward more than the top lip does. Depending on how thin or fleshy your lips are, there will be a different amount of impact to this. But that is the gist of what goes on with them. So your bottom lip in most cases will catch more light than your top lip. And the bottom lip is supported by this kind of like muscle and fatty tissue that goes between your mouth and your chin. There's a sort of particular structure that, again, we all have, but we just have different versions of it. Sometimes it's thicker or thinner, wider or narrower, taller or shorter. But that volume is what supports the bottom lip and gives it a certain amount of its shape as those tissues from the inside of your mouth wrap outward. And that becomes important on this guy since he's making such a strange kind of pursed expression with his lips. It's helpful to know where the lips come from in order to figure out where they've gone. So that whereas we don't see a lot of the lips, we do see this sort of tensing of that supportive shape that happens between the mouth and the chin. Now, the chin itself is masked by that tuft of facial hair. If we could see it, in spite of that sort of double chin that's happening, we would actually still see the line of the chin because there's a landmark there that the skin of your face always touches the bone right at your chin. So if your neck does inflate, you'll still have a line of the chin, which is why we see double chins on people. But it's that invisible chin hidden behind the beard that leads us to the mustache in this demo, and then back down to that goatee, which really, in this case, there's no sense in trying to draw a chin under it. Not from this angle, because the beard itself becomes, a pretty important graphic shape in the composition. And it's symmetrical in its overall view, but then a closer examination reveals some asymmetry in its specific contours. But that blocking in of the mustache and beard is what is going to inspire us into to starting to push some values here, which is a good reason for that mustache and beard to come in when they did, in that they are core tones of the value scale. Those are areas where the composition just becomes as dark as it's going to be. So the blackest black of the picture, once we put that in, it gives us a comparison between the paper, right, this gray paper we're using, and the darkest black that we're going to get in the picture. So once we have those stated, right, once we've got the local value of the paper and that darkest value that our picture is going to come, we can go about starting to figure out, just kind of 2 or 3 values that happen in between them. A dark that is not quite as dark as black, and a mid-tone that is not quite as light as the paper. All right, so now as we get over to the area of the ear, it seems worth saying a word or two about the ear. Now, all our ears are the same. There are differences in proportion, but we're generally looking at the same parts and even within the same shape structure. So we're going to start off with a shape that we'd like to call Derpy South America. As if you ask people not from South America to draw South America, this is all they're going to come up with. It's just how people are. But Derpy South America, as the ear, hooks onto the back of the jaw. The line of your jaw is the line of the start of your ear. And then somewhere towards the middle of Derpy, South America, there is a lovely little diving platform. And the diving platform, we will soon see, sits over Pork Chop Canyon. It's a deep, it's a deep spot. Quite a severe valley, and in the bottom of Pork Chop Canyon, again, so named because of its pork chop-like shape. There's a ridge that rises from the bottom and forms a kind of sharp wall around the top area of Derpy, South America. With a little, it's sharp enough to even have a little bit of an overhang. It forms a lip. Though the further down it gets, the shallower it becomes down below the Pork Chop Canyon area, which gives us room for an earlobe at the bottom. But what it then does is it creates a second ridge that runs up between the wall and Pork Chop Canyon, and that ridge divides into a Y shape before tucking under the wall. And if you get those shapes, you've got an ear, and you vary those proportions a little bit, you've got anyone's ear. So the diving platform over Pork Chop Canyon, and that great wall, and that additional ridge in the shape of a Y. And the ear kind of draws itself. So on this gentleman, his ridge, that Y-shaped ridge, protrudes out past the wall when we see him from the front. Less visible on the other side, but just a bit. And we go around just, the more you draw, the more you see. So as our large shapes are blocked in, the more we start to see little shapes within them. Trying to keep a little bit of a geometric thought to this. We don't want our edges soft and fuzzy. If you like a soft, fuzzy drawing, save that part for the end. Make distinct decisions up until that point. The most blended and smooth pictures you've ever seen are still blended and smooth arrangements of distinct shapes and values. And the same goes on for clothing items. So like drapery, in this case, the foreshortened top of the hat. We want to keep our shapes specific, and they're more forgiving in clothing than they are on a face. If the contours of a hat are wrong, it's not the same as drawing a nose that is not a nose. But if we focus on these kind of puzzle-like shapes, even when just going straight into building up tone, as is happening here, we get where we're going faster. We achieve accuracy more quickly than we otherwise might. All right, and every shape you put in sort of reveals the next shape for you. And finding additional little kind of volumes within the volumes. Values that can sort of all deepen up a little more now that the hat has supplied some context for the face. So we can go ahead and start blocking in some garment shapes. Now, some of what we're going to see here is based on our light source, but it's our light source dealing with this sort of particular pull of the fabric here. Fabric in many cases wrinkles more like a crumpled piece of paper than many of us would expect. It is surprisingly angular. and it's generally comprised of, we won't see a whole lot of it here because of the suit jacket going over there and the amount that's hidden in shadow. But a lot of what happens in drapery is we have areas where fabric is pulled tight, areas where fabric gathers, and areas where fabric pools. Most of what we're seeing here is simply the lines where fabric is being pulled. But the gathering points generally are areas like in the armpit or around a sort of tucked in shirt, around a belt line, or on pants you get behind the knee and you get kind of the crotch area. That's where we see a lot of kind of scrunching of the fabric that's being, that runs counter to the areas where it's being pulled smoother. So as your clothing pulls across your shoulder, it will kind of scrunch up in the armpit, and then wherever gravity leads it to becomes where it pools, where there's where, as opposed to a pulling or a scrunching, the main force acting on it is simply its own weight. And back up there. And as you build things up, the context changes. The outfit itself becomes a little bit of an environment. We get to a sense of where some of this reflected light is actually bouncing up from on the shirt, or where some of these shadows are allowed to get darker because the force acting on them is rather the darkness of the suit jacket rather than reflected light off of the white shirt. I'll just go ahead and get this blocked in. So I'm using this side of the pencil more than the tip here. Anyway, so we're going to see a fair amount of kind of streaking going on. And, the amount of sort of hatch line and mark left over comes down to like an individual aesthetic among artists, and how much gets left and how much gets resolved kind of comes down to like how pretty it is. I mean, really, that's what most of our decisions are ultimately about. Is once we've conveyed what we're trying to, once we've communicated what a picture is supposed to communicate, however simple or complex that is, where we leave it comes down to what we want it to look like. What level of expressiveness we want left, how much process we want to see, and how much of a magic trick we want to hide it all behind. I personally am no good at magic tricks, so when it comes to the smoothing out magic trick, photorealist aesthetic, I defer to damage control and simply try not to make anything worse. All right, and you can see by getting that kind of core tone up in there, it gives a sense of what value has really been achieved in these large dark masses. That what seemed to be blocked in dark, now kind of fades in contrast with, a few really black shadows. So I'm going ahead and doing some smaller kind of hatching and scribbling work in between all of the streaks, where I just blocked in the tone loosely. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here. I really, for a drawing, yes, an important thing in a drawing is to make sure that the parts you loved and the parts that were killing you look like you loved them just as much. Whatever bores you to draw should look as if you love it as much as the whole thing that made you want to draw in the first place. If you love eyes, make sure the collar of the shirt looks like you love drawing it as much as you love drawing eyes. All right, so we're going in just a little more finessing, just pushing a few more core tones, looking at, the shapes within shapes to make sure that the overall like emotion of the face and the compositional shapes of it are what we're trying to get. Because our next step is going to be to break out the white conte crayon. And if we've done enough here, that will go surprisingly quickly. All right, so here we are, breaking out the white conte, which is essentially, it's really a white chalk. I'm sure it has a little bit of pigment in there, but not as much as chalk pastels do. So I'm going in with the kneaded eraser, because one thing that can happen when combining graphite and a chalk component is graphite has two purposes in the world. Like, we use it to draw, and it also serves as a lubricant. It forms a slippery surface. It's used in, like, lock lubricants in particular. But you can get pieces of metal to slide over each other more smoothly if there's graphite between them. And so the same goes when we go to use our pastel, that if we've got too much pencil built up in places that we're trying to build up lights, we're just going to slide over the surface. So I'm even, in a few spots, I'm taking a white eraser and just making sure I've pulled up to the paper. And you're looking for anywhere I might have overstated the pencil on volumes that are best created with the conte crayon. So we're going to take the conte crayon, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the brightest whites. You want to squint at your reference at this point. Really look for anywhere where your light crests. You don't want to start off like softly rendering. You want to find out these statements, and they're going to be largely where planes change. Where something that is vertical becomes horizontal, where bone sticks out. Because these are areas that the light is going to sort of bounce and reflect off of. It's one of those things that is true for any complexion too. I'm fairly olive complected. Some people, depending on how light or dark your complexion, more of the work is done with reflection than modeling. So the light reflecting off of your skin, as opposed to just the light kind of falling over it. But so what we're going for is we're looking for those really bright accents of light that mostly happen at plane changes and areas of foreshortening. And we don't want to overdo it either. If you get too many of these in a face, it actually will start to flatten it out. So you really want to make sure that you pay attention to a hierarchy of these shapes. What are your biggest and brightest, and how do they begin to fall off from there? And like we did with the pencil, kind of bouncing down from the face to the clothing, which serves as, essentially as an environment here, right? Much of our reflected light and what we can or can't see in the shadows relates to how light interacts with the clothing. So once we've got a little more context for that in the picture, we're going to go in and now start to just softly connect those crescendos of light. All right, this is the point where we're rendering, where the light is just kind of softly falling off of these planes that we've exaggerated a little bit with these little pinpoints of bright light. And by building up that volume, it allows us to then look at the side of the face with reflected light and determine, how much of that job should be done by the paper and where is it worth getting the, introducing some conte crayon for a little extra volume. And where that happens, again, similar to the crescendos, is we see a lot of it where planes large and small become most foreshortened, or where the plane change is most drastic. All right, so the side of the face that recedes back is a foreshortened plane. If we catch the light on that to tell us that the side of the face faces a different direction than the front of the face, it helps give the face volume. And for a head-on shot with asymmetrical light like this, that becomes really important. Because let's face it, this guy's kind of got a fat head, but we don't want to exaggerate it to the point where it flattens out the silhouette of his head. And now for effect, kind of like we did in that charcoal demo, we are going to pull up the background. Just give him some negative space to work against. Because one of the things that we should be paying attention to, just even as we shoot reference, is, not just the character that we're creating, but we want to make sure that that character has an interesting silhouette. That before we get to the details as a viewer, we want to make sure that the overall shape itself is something that we want to investigate. And that's something that's constantly going on in pictures. We want to make sure that our large decisions create enough mystery that our audience wants to examine, and we want to make sure that our details provide the payoff for people that have put their nose up against a picture. So, just fine-tuning edges. The fine-tuning period of a picture can just go on for hours or days. There's a large amount to image making that involves just staring and making a little mark and walking away and walking back and making a little mark and walking away and walking back and so on. And more little marks. All right, and that is getting us to the home stretch. And once again, just the longer you work, the more you see, the more you add to your picture, the more it changes the context of what was there before. And the hope is that the last mark you make is the one that makes it feel finished.